Hey folks, what's happening? Let's get into chapter 7. This is social stratification and social inequality. Social stratification is a characteristic of society. It's one that persists over generations, and it's maintained through cultural beliefs. In a stratified society, groups at the top of the hierarchy have greater access to goods and services than members or groups at the bottom. And in the United States, we find several systems of stratification. We know that if you're wealthy, white, and male, you tend to gain access to the vast majority of the benefits of society. And if you are poor, non-white, and female, you tend to gain access to the least amount of benefits of society. And because stratification is so impacting over our life chances, it certainly is a topic worthwhile of study for sociology. One of the first systems of slavery, or one of the first systems of stratification, is of course slavery. This is the most extreme form of stratification, and is of course based on legal ownership of people. Even though slavery was abolished in the United States in the 1800s, there is still modern day slavery that persists. It persists illegally, but it still persists in many forms across the globe. And we especially find this in human trafficking. A caste system is another form of stratification. This is a form of social stratification which status is determined by one's family history and background and cannot be changed. A good example is South Africans, especially between 1948 and 1991, when you had apartheid. South Africans were legally classified into 4 main racial categories: white, Indian, colored, and black. Blacks, of course, formed a large majority at 60% of the population. These groups were geographically and socially separated from one another. Blacks were forcibly removed from almost 80% of the country, which was reserved for the 3 other minority groups, and relocated to independent homelands similar to the Indian reservations in the United States. They could not enter other parts of the country without a pass, and if they did get a pass, it was usually in order to work as guest laborers in white areas. Ironically, African Americans visiting South Africa were given honorary white status and could move freely within white and non-white areas. So, as it is with caste system, it is tied to one's family history and background, not just the color of one's skin. As I mentioned, an example of a caste system is, of course, apartheid in South Africa. Another system of social stratification is social class. Social class is a system of stratification based on access to resources such as wealth, property, power, and prestige. We usually refer to this as SES, or the socioeconomic status of a person in a society defined by social class. And we have to be especially aware of intersectionality, which is a concept that identifies how different categories of inequality, like class, race, and gender, intersect to impact one's socioeconomic status in a social class system. The social classes in the United States: upper and upper middle class. The upper class consists of the wealthiest people in a class system. They possess most of the wealth, and they make up about 1% of the population. The upper class is the next class, the upper middle class is the next class down, and that makes up about 14% of the population. They share less of the benefits of society than the upper class does, but let's not think that they're deprived. The middle class includes white-collar workers and has a broad range of incomes, makes up about 30% of the U.S. population. The working class includes blue-collar or service industry workers. These members are less likely to have college degrees, and they make up about 30% of the U.S. population. The working poor members are more likely doing manual and service jobs and seasonal employment. This makes up about 13%, and the underclass are likely employed part-time or underemployed, and they make up about 12%. When we look at this, and we see this social class ladder in the U.S., just looking at things in reference to salary or typical household incomes. The upper class, we're talking $2 million a year, and that's just an income. That's not taking in to consideration their wealth. The upper middle class is about $150,000 a year, and middle class $70,000. So if you want to be in the middle class, ladies and gentlemen, your family income is going to have to be around $70,000. You need to process that because $70,000 is a lot of money. Working class is making about 40 grand, the working poor 25, and the underclass is making 15,000. So when we think of theories of social class, one of the driving social theories that's attacked the social class perspective is conflict theory. This is Karl Marx, and he believed that there were two main social classes in capitalist societies. The capitalist, or the bourgeoisie, who owned the means of production, and the workers, or the proletariat, who sold their labor for wages. And he believed that the classes would remain divided and social inequality would grow in reference to this type of social system. Weber also dealt with theories of social class. He was in many respects standing on the shoulders of Marx, and he offered a similar model that also included some social and cultural factors. He argued that class status was made up of three components: wealth, power, and prestige. Sometimes these are referred to as the three P's, or a three-pronged image of power. When we think of wealth, we are thinking of money and investments. Power is political power, or the ability to make changes in the system. And prestige is the social honor people are given because of their membership in well-regarded social groups. Sometimes a person might have all three of these scoring high, but sometimes a person may have one, but not the others. But the most successful and powerful people have all three. Structural functionalism, it also takes a crack at social stratification and suggests that the system of stratification that has emerged is functional to society in many ways. Certain roles are more important for the functioning of society, and these roles may be more difficult to fill. So more incentive is needed, more pay is needed for these people to fill those positions, and greater rewards are necessary for work that requires more training or skill. The functionalist perspective helps explain the existing system of social stratification and its persistence, but it still leaves us with questions about the structured inequalities that the system continues to reproduce. More recently, especially with postmodernism and social reproduction theories, Pierre Bourdieu attempted to explain social reproduction. Social reproduction is the tendency for social class status to be passed down from one generation to the next. He felt that that while we like to believe that our society has an open system in which people have social mobility, we can notice patterns that lack this inter- and intra-generational mobility. According to Bourdieu, this happens because each generation acquires cultural capital, which helps us to gain advantage in society. Ultimately, this cultural capital either helps or hinders us as we become adults. For instance, it's very helpful for business people to know how to play golf, as many important business deals are struck on the golf course. Growing up in a family that can teach you how to play golf can give you some cultural capital that will be very advantageous to you as you move throughout the workplace. The symbolic interactionists have also gotten into the argument. They examine the way we use status differences to categorize ourselves and others. As Irving Goffman pointed out, our clothing, speech, gestures, possessions, friends, and activities provide information about our socioeconomic status. So you might notice that you wear similar brands of clothing or eat at similar restaurants as your friends do. You might also notice that there are other people who wear or eat things that are different from you. These preferences might say something about the class that you're being associated with. So you have to be aware of how you present yourself, because you might be giving social tells on what class that you are from, for better or for worse. Socioeconomic status, or SES, is certainly tied to life chances. We know that belonging to a certain social class has profound consequences for individuals in all areas of life, including family, health, education, work, and income. Think about which people in society tend to have greater access to these resources. Not everyone has an equal chance of getting into Harvard, or being operated on by the best surgeon, or even becoming the President of the United States, despite what people are told in school. People also tend to marry those whose social and cultural backgrounds are similar to their own, mainly because they're more likely to meet people like themselves, and then have something in common with them once they meet them. With social mobility, we're forced to think about closed and open systems. Social mobility, of course, is the movement of individuals or groups within the hierarchical system of social classes. A closed system is one in which there is very little opportunity to move from one class to another, and an open system is one with ample opportunity to move from one class to another. In the United States, we technically have an open system. It is legal and permissible for people to move between classes, but we certainly can notice structural patterns where people tend to stay close to the class they were raised in. And you're certainly going to have limited ability to penetrate the upper, middle, and upper classes. A couple of things to think about: intergenerational mobility, which is the movement between social classes that occurs from one generation to the next, and intragenerational mobility, which is the movement between social classes that occurs over the course of an individual's lifetime. An example of intergenerational mobility would be a plumber who has a daughter who becomes a doctor. Intragenerational mobility would be a man who is a secretary but then goes back to school to become a lawyer. The mobility in that situation would be within his own lifetime and would likely change his social class.